The sound of a Winchester rifle echoed across the Montana prairie as Josephine Ellis steadied herself against the weathered fence post, her hands still trembling from what she'd just done. The year was 1878, and she had finally escaped the nightmare that had been her life for the past 3 years. Behind her lay the body of the man who had kept her prisoner, who had broken her body, but never her spirit. The dust of the trail rose in the distance as Josephine hurriedly gathered what few possessions she could claim as her own. She had to leave before anyone discovered what had happened. The small mining town of Silver Creek was 5 miles north, and it represented her only hope for a new beginning. With determination burning in her eyes, she set off, limping slightly, her bruised face half hidden beneath a worn bonnet. Josephine had once been the pride of her family, back in Boston, educated, refined, and full of promise. That was before she'd been deceived by a charming man who'd promised her a life of adventure in the West, only to sell her to the monster from whose cabin she now fled. The years of abuse had left their mark, both visible in her scars and invisible in the nightmares that plagued her sleep. As the sun climbed higher in the vast Montana sky, Josephine's pace slowed. Her body, weakened from years of mistreatment and inadequate food, protested with each step. The water in her canteen had run dry hours ago, and the unforgiving summer heat beat down mercilessly upon her exposed neck. By mid-afternoon, Silver Creek appeared on the horizon like a mirage. The small collection of buildings shimmered in the heat, and Josephine felt a surge of hope mixed with trepidation. What kind of life could a woman with her past possibly build here? She'd heard the whispers about women like her, damaged goods, they called them, as if human beings could be assessed like merchandise at a general store. When she finally staggered into town, heads turned. Despite her attempts to appear presentable, Josephine knew she must look half wild, her clothes dirty, her face bruised, her eyes carrying that haunted look that told its own story. She made her way to what appeared to be the town's only hotel, a 2-story wooden structure with peeling paint and a sign that proclaimed it the Silver Creek Lodge. The woman behind the desk, a stern-faced widow named Mrs. Hargrave, looked Josephine up and down with undisguised suspicion. "I need a room," Josephine said, her voice hoarse from disuse. "I can pay." She placed $3 on the counter, money she had saved in secret over the years. "Where's your husband?" Mrs. Hargrave asked, making no move to take the money. "I'm traveling alone," Josephine replied, meeting the woman's gaze steadily. Mrs. Hargrave's mouth tightened into a thin line. "We don't rent to women of questionable character." The words stung, though they weren't unexpected. Josephine had learned long ago that the world was quick to judge and slow to understand. "I'm not what you think," she said quietly. "I'm simply looking for a fresh start. Aren't we all?" Mrs. Hargrave replied coldly. "There's a place at the edge of town for women in your situation." Before Josephine could respond, the hotel door swung open, and a tall figure filled the doorway. The man who entered removed his hat, revealing sun-bronzed features and eyes the color of the summer sky. His clothes were dusty from the trail, but there was an undeniable dignity in the way he carried himself. "Afternoon, Mrs. Hargrave," he said, his voice deep and measured. "I was hoping you might have a room available for a few days." "For you, Mr. Rollins?" "Always," the woman replied, her demeanor instantly transformed. "Lucky Reed, you're a sight for sore eyes. How's the herd this season?" The man Lucky smiled politely, but his attention had already shifted to Josephine. She felt herself shrinking under his gaze, instinctively fearful of male attention. "Everything all right here?" he asked, glancing between Josephine and Mrs. Hargrave. "Just explaining to this woman that we have standards in Silver Creek," Mrs. Hargrave replied. Lucky studied Josephine for a long moment, taking in her disheveled appearance and the purple bruise blossoming on her cheekbone. His expression remained unreadable, but something in his eyes softened. "Mrs. Hargrave," he said, never taking his eyes off Josephine. "I believe this lady needs a room. Put it on my account." The older woman's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "But, Mr. Rollins, she needs a place to rest," he interrupted firmly. "And a hot meal. Can you arrange that?" Mrs. Hargrave looked as though she had swallowed something sour, but she nodded reluctantly. "Room 3 is available," she said, sliding a key across the counter. Josephine stared at the key, then at Lucky Reed. "I don't accept charity," she said, her pride the one thing no one had been able to take from her rising to the surface. Lucky's mouth quirked slightly at one corner. "It's not charity, madam. It's common decency. Something that seems in short supply these days." He turned to Mrs. Hargrave. "Please make sure she has whatever she needs." He placed several gold coins on the counter, enough to cover a week's stay, and then some. Before Josephine could protest further, he had tipped his hat and was gone, the door swinging shut behind him. Mrs. Hargrave reluctantly showed Josephine to a small but clean room on the second floor. When the door closed, leaving her finally alone, Josephine sank onto the edge of the bed and, for the first time in years, allowed herself to cry not from despair, but from the overwhelming sensation of being treated like a human being again. The next morning, Josephine awoke to sunlight streaming through the thin curtains of her room. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous day came flooding back, and she sat up, heart racing. Had she really escaped? Was she truly free? A knock at the door sent a jolt of fear through her. Had they found her? Had someone discovered what she'd done and followed her here? "Who is it?" she called, hating the tremor in her voice. "Mrs. Hargrave, with your breakfast," came the reply. Cautiously, Josephine opened the door to find the hotel proprietress standing there with a tray bearing a plate of eggs, bacon, and biscuits, along with a steaming cup of coffee. "Mr. Rollins instructed that you be well fed," Mrs. Hargrave said, her tone suggesting that she personally disagreed with the directive. "He also left this." She handed Josephine a folded note before turning on her heel and marching back down the hall. Josephine set the tray on a small table by the window and unfolded the note with trembling fingers. "Miss, I hope you found some peace in your rest. Doc Matthews has his office across from the general store. He's discreet and kind. Tell him Lucky sent you. No charity, just neighbors helping neighbors. That's how we survive out here."
LR.
Josephine read the note twice, unsure what to make of this stranger's kindness. In her experience, men only helped women when they wanted something in return. But there had been something different in Lucky Reed's eyes, a straightforwardness, a lack of the predatory gleam she had come to recognize and fear. After finishing her breakfast, the first real meal she'd had in longer than she could remember, Josephine tidied herself as best she could. The hotel room had a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and she used the water to clean away the dust of travel and the lingering reminders of her past life. Looking in the small, cloudy mirror above the washstand, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. At 24, she should have been in the prime of her life. Instead, her face was too thin, her once vibrant auburn hair dull, her green eyes haunted. The bruise on her cheek had darkened overnight, joining the array of older marks that told the story of her captivity. Steeling herself, Josephine left the safety of her room and made her way downstairs. The hotel's small lobby was empty except for a young boy sweeping the floor. Outside, Silver Creek was beginning to stir to life, shopkeepers opening their doors, wagons moving up and down the dusty main street. Josephine followed the directions in Lucky's note and soon found herself standing outside a modest building with a sign identifying it as the office of Dr. Elijah Matthews. Taking a deep breath, she knocked on the door. It opened to reveal a man in his 50s with kind eyes and a salt and pepper beard. "Can I help you, miss?" he asked. "Lucky Reed sent me," Josephine said, the words feeling strange on her tongue. The doctor's expression changed from polite inquiry to gentle concern. "Come in, please," he said, stepping aside. The doctor's office was neat and smelled of antiseptic and herbs. He led Josephine to a small examination room in the back. "Lucky has a habit of finding people who need help," Dr. Matthews said as he gestured for her to sit. "He didn't tell me your name." "Josephine Ellis," she said, the name feeling both familiar and foreign after so long being known only as woman or worse. "Well, Miss Ellis, how can I help you today?" Josephine hesitated. How could she explain everything? Where would she even begin? I've been hurt," she said finally. Dr. Matthews nodded, his expression compassionate but professional. "May I examine you?" For the next hour, the doctor gently assessed her injuries, the bruises, the poorly healed fractures, the evidence of long-term malnutrition. He asked questions, but never pushed when Josephine fell silent on certain subjects. When he finished, he mixed a tonic for her pain and gave her salve for her visible bruises. "You're malnourished and exhausted," he told her, "but you'll heal with proper care and rest. The physical wounds, at least." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Lucky Reed is a good man. If he's taken an interest in your welfare, you can trust him." "Why would he help someone like me?" Josephine asked, the question that had been plaguing her since the previous day finally escaping. Dr. Matthews smiled sadly. "Lucky knows something about second chances. His sister was in a situation not unlike yours, I suspect. She didn't survive it." The information settled heavily in Josephine's chest. It explained the cowboy's kindness, but also raised her guard. Was his help merely the result of displaced guilt? A way to atone for a sister he couldn't save? As Josephine left the doctor's office, her mind whirling with questions, she nearly collided with a woman carrying a basket of fresh bread.
"Oh."
"Excuse me," Josephine apologized, stepping back. The woman, who appeared to be in her early 30s, smiled warmly. "No harm done. You must be new to Silver Creek. I'm Martha Jenkins. I run the bakery down the street." "Josephine Ellis," she replied hesitantly, and used to friendly conversation. Martha's gaze lingered on Josephine's bruised face, but her smile never faltered. "I was just delivering Doc Matthews his weekly bread. Are you settling in all right?" Before Josephine could answer, Martha continued, "Listen, I'm short-handed at the bakery. My assistant left to get married last month, and I could use some help. If you're looking for work, I pay fair and the hours aren't too demanding." Josephine stared at the woman, stunned by the unexpected offer.
I
don't know anything about baking," she admitted. Martha laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "I can teach you. What I need most is someone reliable who can help with customers and clean up. Think about it and come by if you're interested." She pointed down the street to a small shop with a sign depicting a loaf of bread. "I'm there from dawn till about 3 each day." With that, Martha continued into the doctor's office, leaving Josephine standing on the boardwalk, bewildered by the second act of kindness she'd received in less than a day. As the days passed, Silver Creek began to feel less like a temporary hiding place and more like a potential home. Josephine had taken Martha on her offer and started working at the bakery. The work was hard but satisfying, kneading dough, serving customers, learning the rhythms of a normal life. Some townspeople kept their distance, eyeing her with suspicion or outright hostility. Mrs. Hargrave had made sure the whispers spread that Josephine was damaged goods, a woman of questionable morals. But others, like Martha and Doc Matthews, treated her with kindness and respect. Of Lucky Reed, Josephine had seen little. She'd caught glimpses of him riding through town or emerging from the bank, but they hadn't spoken since that first day. She'd written a note thanking him for his help and left it at the hotel desk, unable to bring herself to seek him out directly. She'd told herself it was because she didn't want to be beholden to him, but the truth was more complicated. Something about the tall cowboy with the steady gaze unsettled her, not with fear, as other men did, but with a strange sort of awareness she wasn't ready to examine. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after her arrival in Silver Creek, Josephine was closing up the bakery when she heard shouting from the saloon across the street. A moment later, the bat-wing doors burst open and a group of men spilled out onto the boardwalk. In the center of the commotion was Lucky Reed, his face set in grim lines as he faced down a burly man with a bushy beard. "You're a dead man, Reed," the bearded man slurred, his hand hovering near his holstered pistol. "Go home, Davison," Lucky replied, his voice calm despite the tension crackling in the air. "You're drunk and you're a fool." Josephine froze, her hand on the bakery door, as several other men tried to pull Davison away. "Think you're better than everyone, don't you?" Davison spat. "You and your high-minded ways. What about that whore you brought to town? Everyone knows what she is." Josephine's breath caught in her throat. They were talking about her. Lucky's expression darkened. "Apologize," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Davison laughed, an ugly sound. "For what? Telling the truth? She's damaged goods, and everyone knows it." In a movement so swift Josephine could barely follow it, Lucky's fist connected with Davison's jaw, sending the larger man stumbling backward. "She's a treasure compared to the likes of you," Lucky said, his voice carrying clearly across the street. "A woman trying to rebuild her life deserves respect, not the venom of small-minded men." Davison recovered his balance and lunged at Lucky, but the cowboy sidestepped neatly, causing the drunken man to stumble face first into the dirt. The crowd erupted in laughter, further enraging Davison, who scrambled to his feet and reached for his gun. "No!" Josephine cried out, the word escaping before she could stop it. All heads turned in her direction. Lucky's eyes met hers across the distance, and in that moment, something passed between them, an understanding, a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. The distraction was all Davison needed. He drew his gun, but before he could aim it properly, Lucky had disarmed him with a swift, practiced move, twisting the man's arm behind his back. "That's enough, Davison," came a new voice, and Josephine saw the town sheriff approaching, his expression weary. "You're spending the night in my jail until you sober up." As the sheriff led the protesting Davison away, the crowd began to disperse. Lucky handed the confiscated gun to one of Davison's friends with a stern warning, then crossed the street toward the bakery. Josephine's first instinct was to flee, to hide in the safety of her room at the hotel, but she forced herself to remain where she was. She would not run anymore. "Are you all right, Miss Ellis?" Lucky asked as he approached, his concern evident. "I should be asking you that," she replied. "You're the one who nearly got shot defending my honor." A slight smile curved his lips. Davison's all talk. And even drunk, he couldn't hit the broadside of a barn with that pistol. His expression grew serious. "I'm sorry you had to hear that." Josephine looked down, absently brushing flour from her apron. "It's nothing I haven't heard before," she said quietly. "And nothing that isn't true, according to most folks' reckoning." "Then most folks are wrong," Lucky said firmly. She looked up, startled by the conviction in his voice. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he replied. "I know you've survived something that would have broken many. I know you're working hard to build a new life. And I know courage when I see it, Miss Ellis." Josephine felt heat rising to her cheeks and used to such direct praise. "Thank you for what you said. About me being a treasure. Even if it isn't true, it was kind of you to say." Lucky studied her for a long moment, his blue eyes serious. "I meant every word," he said finally. "And I'd be honored if you'd allow me to walk you back to the hotel. It's getting dark." Josephine hesitated. Being alone with any man, even one who had shown her nothing but kindness, sent tendrils of anxiety through her body. But something about Lucky Reed made her want to trust again, to believe that not all men were like the ones who had hurt her. "I'd appreciate that," she said softly. They walked in companionable silence for a few minutes, the setting sun painting the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Silver Creek was quieting for the night, shopkeepers closing up, families gathering for evening meals. "How are you finding the bakery work?" Lucky asked, breaking the silence. "I enjoy it," Josephine replied, surprised by how true it was. "Martha is a good teacher and a kind employer. I've never had a proper job before." "You seem suited to it. I've noticed you have a way with the customers, especially the children." Josephine glanced at him, surprised. "You've been watching me?" Lucky looked somewhat abashed. "Not in an unseemly way, I assure you. My ranch is a few miles outside town, but I come in for supplies regularly. The bakery happens to be on my route." Josephine's lips curved in a small smile. "And you happen to have developed a sudden fondness for Martha's cinnamon rolls?" "They're excellent," Lucky defended, returning her smile with one of his own. As they reached the hotel, Josephine felt an unexpected reluctance to end their conversation. For the first time in years, she had spoken to a man without fear dominating her every thought. "Thank you for the escort, Mr. Reed," she said formally, retreating behind politeness as a shield against the unfamiliar emotions stirring within her. "Lucky," he corrected gently. "Mr. Reed was my father." "Lucky," she repeated, the name feeling intimate on her tongue. He hesitated, seeming to debate something internally. "Miss Ellis." "Josephine, if I may. Would you consider joining me for dinner tomorrow evening? Nothing fancy, just a meal at the hotel restaurant." "In public," he added quickly, clearly sensing her hesitation. "No obligations or expectations." The invitation sent a flurry of conflicting emotions through Josephine. Fear, certainly, but also a strange, tentative hope. Could she do this? Could she sit across from a man and share a meal without the past overwhelming her? "You don't have to answer now," Lucky said, misinterpreting her silence as rejection. "I understand if it's too soon, or if you'd rather not." "Yes," Josephine interrupted, surprising herself as much as him. "Yes, I'd like that." The smile that transformed Lucky's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Tomorrow at 6, then?" Josephine nodded, a small smile of her own forming. "Tomorrow at 6. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Josephine felt lighter than she had in years. The prospect of dinner with Lucky both terrified and exhilarated her. It was a small step, but a significant one, a choice made freely, without coercion or fear. For the first time since her escape, Josephine allowed herself to imagine a future that held more than mere survival. It was a dangerous hope, perhaps, but hope nonetheless. And in the harsh world of the western frontier, hope was as precious as gold. The next evening, Josephine stood before the small mirror in her hotel room, scrutinizing her appearance with nervous eyes. The bruise on her cheek had faded to a yellowish shadow, and the few weeks of regular meals had begun to fill out her gaunt frame. She wore her best dress, a modest blue calico that Martha had helped her purchase with her first wages from the bakery. Her hands trembled slightly as she pinned her hair, and she took a deep breath, willing herself to be calm. It was just dinner, she reminded herself. Just a meal with a kind man who had helped her when she needed it most. But it was more than that, and Josephine knew it. It was a test of her courage, of her ability to trust, of her readiness to rejoin the world of normal human connections. At precisely 6 o'clock, she descended the stairs to the hotel lobby. Lucky was already there, waiting near the entrance to the small dining room. He'd traded his usual trail-worn clothes for clean trousers and a pressed shirt, his dark hair neatly combed. When he saw her, his face lit up with a smile that made her heart skip a beat. "You look lovely," he said simply. "Thank you," she replied, fighting the urge to look away from his admiring gaze. "You clean up nicely yourself." The dining room was modestly appointed but clean, with a few other diners already seated at the scattered tables. As Lucky led her to a table by the window, Josephine was acutely aware of the curious glances directed their way. Silver Creek was small enough that their dinner together would be the subject of tomorrow's gossip. "I hope you don't mind being seen with me," Josephine said once they were seated, voicing the worry that had been gnawing at her. "People talk, and your reputation. My reputation can withstand a dinner with a beautiful woman," Lucky interrupted gently. "And I've never much cared what people say about me." Mrs. Hargrave herself came to take their order, her thin lips pursed in disapproval as her gaze flickered between them. If Lucky noticed her attitude, he gave no sign of it, treating the older woman with the same easy courtesy he showed everyone. Once they were alone again, an awkward silence fell. Josephine realized she had no idea how to engage in normal conversation after years of isolation and fear. What did people talk about over dinner? Weather? Politics? The price of cattle? "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I'm not very good at this." Lucky's expression softened. "There's no right or wrong way to have dinner, Josephine. We could sit here in complete silence if that's what makes you comfortable." His understanding loosened something tight in her chest. "Tell me about your ranch," she suggested, genuinely curious about the life of the man across from her. Lucky's face brightened as he began to describe the property he'd been building over the past 5 years, the sturdy house he'd constructed with his own hands, the herd of cattle that was steadily growing, the stream that ran through the eastern pasture, clear and sweet even in the hottest months of summer. "It sounds beautiful," Josephine said when he paused. "It is," he agreed. "Lonely sometimes, but beautiful." He hesitated, then added, "My sister would have loved it." Josephine's expression softened. "Dr. Matthews mentioned your sister. I'm sorry for your loss." Lucky nodded, a shadow crossing his features. "Hannah was 19 when she left home to marry a man our parents didn't approve of. We later learned he'd beaten her badly, but by the time I found her—" His voice trailed off, the pain still evident years later. "That's why you helped me," Josephine said softly, understanding dawning. "Partly," Lucky acknowledged, "but not entirely. I helped you because it was the right thing to do. Because every person deserves kindness and dignity." He met her eyes directly. "I don't see you as a substitute for Hannah, if that's what you're thinking. You're your own person, Josephine Ellis, with your own path to walk." The simple declaration brought unexpected tears to Josephine's eyes. For so long, she had been defined by others, by what had been done to her, by the labels people placed upon her. To be seen as her own person, with agency and worth independent of her past, was a gift she hadn't known she needed. Their meal arrived, momentarily breaking the intensity of the moment. As they ate, their conversation turned to lighter topics: books they had read, places they had seen. Josephine found herself laughing at Lucky's dry wit, the sound strange and wonderful to her own ears. "I haven't laughed in years," she admitted after a particularly amusing story about a stubborn mule that had outsmarted Lucky's best ranch hand. "It's a good sound," Lucky said, his expression warm. "I hope to hear more of it." The simple wish, spoken without pressure or expectation, touched something deep inside Josephine. This man, with his quiet strength and gentle manner, made her feel safe in a way she had forgotten was possible. As their dinner drew to a close, Lucky walked her back upstairs to her room, maintaining a respectful distance that Josephine appreciated even as she found herself wondering what it might be like to have him closer. At her door, he removed his hat, holding it against his chest. "Thank you for joining me tonight, Josephine. I enjoyed your company very much." "As did I," she replied honestly. "More than I expected to." A smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. High praise indeed. There was a moment of silence, filled with unspoken possibilities. Josephine knew that in a normal courtship, this might be the moment for a kiss, or at least a touch of hands. But her past made such normal interactions fraught with complexity, and Lucky seemed to understand this, without being told. "Good night, Josephine," he said simply, taking a step back. "Sleep well." "Good night, Lucky," she replied, a mix of relief and disappointment washing through her as she slipped into her room. As she prepared for bed that night, Josephine reflected on the evening with a sense of wonder. For a few hours, she had been just a woman enjoying dinner with a man she was coming to admire, not a victim, not damaged goods, just Josephine. It was a small victory, but a significant one. And as she drifted off to sleep, Josephine allowed herself to imagine what other victories might lie ahead. The weeks that followed brought a routine to Josephine's life that was as healing as any medicine. Her days were spent at Martha's bakery, learning the art of bread making and slowly building friendships with the regular customers who came to prefer her service over Martha's more brusque approach. Her evenings often included Lucky's company, sometimes for dinner, other times for walks along Silver Creek's main street, or occasionally sitting on the hotel's small veranda, watching the sunset while Lucky told her stories of his adventures driving cattle or hunting in the mountains. Some of Silver Creek's residents continued to eye Josephine with suspicion, but as time passed and she proved herself hardworking and respectable, many began to warm to her. Martha's friendship and Lucky's obvious regard provided a shield against the worst of the gossip. One Sunday afternoon in late August, with the summer heat beginning to give way to the first hints of autumn, Lucky asked Josephine if she would like to see his ranch. "It's only a few miles," he assured her, clearly sensing her hesitation. "We can take the buggy, and I'll have you back well before dark." Martha and her husband would join us for the outing. The inclusion of Martha and her quiet, scholarly husband Thomas eased Josephine's concerns about propriety and safety. Still, the prospect of leaving town, of being vulnerable in an unfamiliar place, brought a flutter of anxiety to her stomach. "You don't have to decide right now," Lucky said, misreading her silence. "It was just a thought." "No, I'd like to go," Josephine said quickly, realizing that she genuinely wanted to see the place Lucky spoke of with such pride. "It sounds lovely." The following Sunday found Josephine seated beside Martha in Lucky's sturdy buggy, with Lucky and Thomas riding horses alongside. The journey took them through rolling grasslands dotted with wildflowers and the occasional stand of cottonwood trees. The mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks already dusted with the first snow of the season. "It's beautiful out here," Josephine said, breathing deeply of the clean, sage-scented air. "Lonely, though," Martha commented. "I don't know how Lucky manages all by himself, especially in winter." "Not entirely by myself," Lucky corrected from his position beside the buggy. "I have a foreman and 3 ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse. Good men, all of them." As they crested a gentle rise, Lucky's ranch came into view below them. A sturdy log house stood near a clear stream, with a large barn and several outbuildings arranged nearby. Cattle grazed in the distance, small dark shapes against the golden grass. "Welcome to Blue Water Ranch," Lucky said, a note of pride in his voice as he gestured toward the property. The house itself was larger than Josephine had imagined, a 2-story structure with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Inside, the furnishings were simple but of good quality, the rooms clean and well-ordered. A bookshelf in the sitting room held more volumes than Josephine had seen outside of a proper library. "You're a reader," she observed, running her fingers along the leather spines. "Winter nights are long," Lucky replied with a shrug. "Reading keeps the mind sharp when there's 6 feet of snow outside your door." As Martha and Thomas explored the garden behind the house, Lucky showed Josephine through the remaining rooms a spacious kitchen with a cast-iron stove, a dining room with a table large enough for 8, and upstairs, 3 bedrooms, one of which Lucky had furnished as an office. "It's a big house for one person," Josephine observed as they returned downstairs. Lucky's expression grew thoughtful. "I built it with the future in mind," he said quietly. hoping someday it wouldn't be just for one. The simple statement hung in the air between them, laden with meaning Josephine wasn't sure she was ready to acknowledge. Before she could formulate a response, they were interrupted by Martha calling from outside, announcing that she and Thomas had discovered a patch of late-season berries by the stream. The remainder of the afternoon passed pleasantly, with the four of them gathering berries, touring the barn where Lucky showed off his prize horses, and finally sharing a simple meal that Lucky had prepared in advance. Throughout it all, Josephine found herself watching Lucky in his element, confident, capable, and clearly well-respected by his ranch hands, who tipped their hats respectfully when they encountered their boss and his guests. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the valley, Lucky announced it was time to return to town. Josephine was surprised to find herself reluctant to leave. There was a peace here, a sense of rightness that she hadn't experienced in a very long time. On the journey back to Silver Creek, Josephine sat beside Lucky in the buggy, with Martha and Thomas following on horseback. The cooling evening air prompted Lucky to wrap a blanket around Josephine's shoulders, his hands lingering for just a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for coming today," he said, his voice low. "It meant a lot to me, showing you my home." "Thank you for inviting me," Josephine replied. "It's a beautiful place. You should be proud of what you've built." Lucky was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the trail ahead. "I've been thinking," he said finally, "about your situation at the hotel." Josephine tensed slightly. Her room at the hotel had been adequate for her initial stay in Silver Creek, but it was becoming increasingly clear that she needed to find more permanent accommodations. Her wages from the bakery were enough to cover her basic needs, but renting a proper house was still beyond her means. Martha mentioned that her sister is looking for someone to help with housekeeping and childcare, Lucky continued. "She lives just outside town in a small house with a separate guest cabin. You'd have your own space, and the work wouldn't interfere with your position at the bakery." Josephine considered the offer. "That sounds promising," she said cautiously. "I've been saving for a place of my own, but it will be some time before I can afford it." "I thought you might say that," Lucky replied with a small smile. "You're determined to make your own way, and I admire that. But accepting help when it's offered isn't the same as being dependent." His perception startled her. Josephine had indeed been reluctant to accept assistance, fearing it would create obligations she wasn't prepared to fulfill. Her independence, so recently reclaimed, was precious to her. "I'll speak with Martha about it," she conceded. "Thank you for thinking of me." Lucky's smile broadened. "Always," he said simply, and the single word carried a weight of meaning that warmed Josephine despite the growing chill of the evening. As autumn deepened into winter, Josephine settled into her new living arrangement. Martha's sister Catherine was a cheerful widow with 2 young children who welcomed Josephine's help with genuine appreciation. The guest cabin, though small, offered Josephine the first true privacy she had experienced in years. She adorned it with small touches, wildflowers in a jar, a colorful quilt purchased with her savings, books borrowed from Lucky's extensive collection. Her friendship with Lucky continued to deepen, though neither of them rushed to define what was growing between them. They shared meals, took walks when weather permitted, and on occasion, Lucky would read to Josephine from one of his favorite books, his deep voice bringing the words to life in a way that made her heart race. It was during one such evening, with snow falling gently outside Catherine's warm kitchen, that Lucky first took Josephine's hand in his. The contact was brief, just a gentle squeeze as he bid her goodnight, but it sent a shock through Josephine that was both thrilling and terrifying. That night, lying in her bed in the guest cabin, Josephine confronted the feelings she had been avoiding for months. She was falling in love with Lucky Reed, or perhaps had already fallen. The realization brought with it a complex tangle of emotions: joy, fear, hope, and a deep sense of unworthiness. How could a man like Lucky truly want someone like her, once he knew the full extent of her past? For she had never told him everything, not the worst of what had been done to her, not the full circumstances of her escape. She had shared pieces, carefully edited fragments that hinted at the horror, without revealing its true depth. And Lucky, true to his nature, had never pressed for more than she was willing to give. But if their relationship was to progress beyond friendship, Josephine knew she would have to reveal the whole truth, ugly as it was. The prospect made her physically ill with anxiety. The opportunity came sooner than she expected. 2 days later, a blizzard swept down from the mountains, blanketing Silver Creek in deep snow. Josephine was helping Catherine prepare dinner when a pounding at the door announced Lucky's arrival, his tall frame dusted with snow, his expression grim. "There's word from town," he said after greeting them. The sheriff caught a man trying to ask questions about a woman matching Josephine's description. "Says he's her husband, looking for his runaway wife." Josephine's world tilted sideways, the kitchen suddenly spinning around her. She clutched the back of a chair to steady herself, blood draining from her face. "He's not my husband," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the howling wind outside. "He was my captor." Catherine, sensing the gravity of the moment, quietly ushered her children from the room, leaving Josephine alone with Lucky. "Tell me," Lucky said simply, taking a seat across from her at the kitchen table. And so, with the storm raging outside, Josephine finally told him everything: how she had been deceived by a charming stranger who promised to marry her, how he had instead delivered her to a remote cabin, and the man who had become her torturer for 3 long years, how she had finally seized an opportunity to escape when her captor had become careless with his rifle. "I killed him," she concluded, her voice hollow. "I had to. He would have killed me if I'd failed to escape, or if he'd caught me after. I didn't mean to, I just wanted the rifle, so he couldn't shoot me as I ran." We struggled, and it went off. Throughout her story, Lucky had remained silent, his expression shifting from shock to anger to a deep, smoldering rage that was somehow more frightening than any outburst could have been. "The man in town," he said when she had finished, his voice controlled but tight with emotion, "is he the one who sold you? Or an associate?" "I don't know," Josephine replied, trembling. "I never met any of his associates. He kept me isolated." Lucky stood abruptly, moving to the window to stare out at the swirling snow. "He can't have you," he said, his back to her, the words fierce and certain. "I won't let him take you." "Lucky," Josephine said, rising to stand behind him, "you don't understand. If this man is who I fear he is, he's dangerous. And if word gets out about what I did—" "You defended yourself," Lucky interrupted, turning to face her. "Any court in this territory would call it justifiable homicide." "It's not that simple," Josephine insisted. "There's no proof of what he did to me. It would be my word against his reputation. And men like him, they have connections, money, influence." "So do I," Lucky replied grimly. "More than you might think." Before Josephine could respond, the door opened, admitting a gust of snow and Catherine, her face tight with worry. "Sheriff's here," she announced. "Says he needs to speak with Josephine." Lucky's hand moved instinctively to the gun at his hip, but Josephine placed her hand gently on his arm. "It's all right," she said, though she was far from certain. "I'll speak with him." Sheriff Davis stomped snow from his boots as he entered the kitchen, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts as he nodded to Lucky and Josephine. "Miss Ellis," he said without preamble, "there's a man in town claims to know you. Says his name is James Blackwood, and he's looking for his wife Josephine, who ran away from their home in Idaho 3 months ago." Josephine's knees nearly buckled at the name. Blackwood had been her captor's closest neighbor, a man who had visited occasionally and who, she suspected, had known exactly what was happening in that isolated cabin but had done nothing to help her. "I'm not his wife," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I've never been married." The sheriff studied her face, his expression unreadable. "That's what I figured," he said finally. "Man didn't strike me as the honest sort. Too smooth by half." He turned to Lucky. "Thought you'd want to know, Reed. I've got him cooling his heels in a cell for now. Caught him trying to bribe information out of Mrs. Hargrave." Lucky's expression darkened. "What's your plan, Sheriff?" "Weather like this can't exactly send him packing right away," Sheriff Davis replied. "But once the storm clears, I aim to escort Mr. Blackwood to the territorial line myself, with a strong suggestion he continue east and not look back." He glanced at Josephine. "Unless there's a more official reason I should be holding him? Something you want to report, Miss Ellis?" Josephine hesitated, torn between the desire for justice and the fear of the scrutiny it would bring. I need time to think," she said finally. The sheriff nodded, unsurprised. "Take your time. He's not going anywhere for at least 2 days, judging by this storm." He turned to go, then paused. "Miss Ellis, regardless of what you decide, you should know that Silver Creek looks after its own. And like it or not, you've become one of ours." With that surprisingly gentle declaration, the sheriff departed, leaving Josephine staring after him in wonder. "He's right, you know," Lucky said quietly. "You're not alone anymore, Josephine." The blizzard continued through the night and into the following day, effectively imprisoning everyone in their homes. Josephine remained at Catherine's, too afraid to venture back to her cabin despite Lucky's offer to stand guard. Instead, he slept in a chair by the door, his rifle within easy reach, while Josephine tossed and turned on a pallet near the kitchen fire. By morning, Josephine had reached a decision. She would not officially report what Blackwood and his associate had done to her. The prospect of reliving those horrors in a courtroom, of being disbelieved or blamed, was more than she could bear. But neither would she live in fear of them any longer. When she shared her decision with Lucky, he received it with a respect that confirmed her growing feelings for him. He did not try to change her mind or impose his own solution, though she could see he longed to seek a more permanent resolution to the threat Blackwood represented. "I'll respect your choice," he said simply. "But know this, Josephine. If he ever threatens you again, if he so much as looks in your direction, I won't be so restrained." The storm finally broke on the 3rd day, leaving Silver Creek buried under drifts of snow that reached the windowsills of some buildings. Lucky escorted Josephine back to town, where they learned that Sheriff Davis had been true to his word. As soon as the roads were passable, he had personally escorted James Blackwood to the stage station with a one-way ticket east and a warning never to return. Said he'd be checking with his counterparts along the line to make sure our friend keeps moving. The sheriff informed them with grim satisfaction. "And I've sent wires to a few sheriffs I know in Idaho, asking some discreet questions about a certain cabin and its former occupant." It wasn't perfect justice, but it was more than Josephine had ever expected. For the first time since her escape, she felt the bands of fear around her chest begin to loosen. As winter settled fully over the Montana territory, life in Silver Creek took on a quieter rhythm. The bakery remained busy with holiday orders, and Josephine found herself increasingly integrated into the community. She sang in the church choir at Christmas, helped organize a quilting circle with Catherine and several other women, and even attended the New Year's dance, though she declined all invitations to dance, content to watch from the sidelines with Martha. Through it all, Lucky remained a steady presence in her life, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, but making his feelings increasingly clear through small, considerate gestures and the unmistakable warmth in his eyes whenever they met. It was early February, with the world still locked in winter's grip, when Lucky invited Josephine to dinner at his ranch. Martha and Thomas would be visiting relatives in Helena, so they couldn't accompany her as chaperones, but Lucky assured her that his foreman's wife would be present to ensure propriety. Despite the assurance, Josephine felt a flutter of nervous anticipation as Lucky helped her down from his sleigh in front of a now familiar log house. Something about his manner today felt different, a barely concealed excitement that had him practically vibrating with energy. Inside, the house was warm and inviting, a fire crackling in the large stone fireplace. The foreman's wife, Mrs. Rodriguez, greeted them cheerfully before excusing herself to check on the dinner she was preparing. "I have something to show you," Lucky said once they were alone, taking Josephine's hand and leading her to the sitting room. On the large oak desk by the window sat a stack of official-looking papers. Lucky handed them to Josephine, his expression a mix of pride and nervous anticipation. "I've been corresponding with a lawyer in Boston," he explained as Josephine examined the documents. "And with the sheriff's help, gathering evidence against Blackwood and his associate." Josephine's heart began to race as she read the paper's affidavits from a postmaster in Idaho who remembered delivering mail to the poor woman kept at Hardin's cabin, statements from a storekeeper who had noticed her bruises during one of her rare trips to town, a report from a deputy who had investigated the cabin after receiving Sheriff Davis's inquiries and found evidence consistent with Josephine's account. "How did you do all this?" she whispered, overwhelmed by the validation these documents represented. "I told you I had connections," Lucky replied, his expression serious. "My family in Boston, the parents I rarely speak of, they have influence in certain circles. When I explained the situation, my father was able to engage investigators who could work discreetly." "Why would you go to such lengths?" Josephine asked, though a part of her already knew the answer. Lucky took the papers from her trembling hands and set them aside, then took both her hands in his. "Because you deserve justice," he said simply. "Because what was done to you is wrong, and the men responsible should answer for it." Tears filled Josephine's eyes. "And you did this without telling me? Without pushing me to pursue charges?" "It wasn't my story to tell," Lucky replied. "If you decide you want to use these documents to bring charges, they're here. If not, that's your choice too. But I wanted you to know the truth is documented, your account verified. No one can call you a liar or damaged goods ever again." The term that had haunted her for months now seemed stripped of its power by Lucky's steady gaze and the evidence he had gathered on her behalf. "There's something else," Lucky continued, his grip on her hands tightening slightly. "Something I've wanted to ask you for some time now, but I needed to be sure you were ready to hear it." Josephine's breath caught as Lucky dropped to one knee before her, still holding her hands in his. "Josephine Ellis, from the moment I saw you standing in that hotel lobby, trying so hard to be brave despite everything you'd endured, I knew you were exceptional. These past months have only confirmed what my heart recognized immediately, that you are the strongest, most courageous woman I've ever known." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a delicate gold ring set with a single perfect pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "I love you, Josephine. Not despite your past, but including it because it shaped the remarkable woman you are today. I'm asking if you would do me the great honor of becoming my wife, of building a life with me here at Blue Water Ranch for as long as we both shall live." Josephine stared at the ring, then at the man kneeling before her, this man who had seen her at her most vulnerable and never once made her feel anything less than treasured. "I'm not the woman I was before," she said softly. "I don't know if I can be the wife you deserve." Lucky's expression didn't waver. "I don't want the woman you were before," he replied. "I want you, Josephine, exactly as you are now, scarred, healing, and stronger than you know. I want to be by your side as you continue to reclaim your life, to help when you'll accept it, and stand back when you need to find your own way." His words washed over her like a healing balm, addressing fears she hadn't even fully articulated to herself. This man understood her in ways she had thought impossible, saw value in her where others saw only damage. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "yes, I'll marry you, Lucky Reed." Joy blazed across Lucky's face as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to his feet, pulling her gently into his arms. Slowly, Giving her time to pull away if she wished, he lowered his lips to hers in their first kiss, gentle, reverent, and full of promise. When they separated, both breathless, Lucky rested his forehead against hers. "I will spend every day making sure you know how precious you are to me," he vowed. "And I," Josephine replied, "will do the same for you." Mrs. Rodriguez chose that moment to announce that dinner was served, her knowing smile indicating she had anticipated this outcome. The meal passed in a happy blur, with Lucky and Josephine unable to stop smiling at each other across the table, their joined hands resting between them as they ate. Later, as Lucky drove Josephine back to town in his sleigh, the night sky ablaze with stars and the snow-covered landscape glittering in the moonlight, Josephine felt a sense of peace settle over her that she had thought lost forever. "What are you thinking?" Lucky asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "I was thinking about the first day we met," she replied, "and what you said to that man outside the saloon." Lucky's brow furrowed briefly, then cleared as he remembered. "That you're a treasure?" Josephine nodded. "At the time, I thought it was just a kind lie, something you said to defend a woman you pitied. But you meant it, didn't you?" "With all my heart," Lucky replied without hesitation. From that very first day, Josephine leaned her head against his shoulder, marveling at how far she had come from the frightened, broken woman who had stumbled into Silver Creek 6 months earlier. The past would always be part of her, but it no longer defined her future. That future, bright with promise, now included the man beside her, a man who saw beyond her scars to the treasure beneath. "Take me home, Lucky," she said softly. His arm tightened around her. "Which home? Catherine's? The bakery?" Josephine smiled up at him, her heart full.
"No."
"Our home. Blue Water Ranch." Understanding dawned in Lucky's eyes, followed by a joy so pure it took her breath away. With a gentle flick of the reins, he turned the sleigh around, pointing the horses back toward the ranch and toward the future they would build together, day by day, with patience, love, and the unshakable certainty that some treasures are worth waiting for. Spring came early to the Montana Territory that year, as if nature itself was celebrating the union of Lucky Reed and Josephine Ellis. They were married on a clear April morning, with the mountains still capped in snow but the valley bursting with new growth. The ceremony took place at Blue Water Ranch, with Martha as Josephine's matron of honor and Doc Matthews standing up for Lucky. Nearly everyone from Silver Creek attended, even Mrs. Hargrave, whose initial disdain had gradually given way to grudging respect as she witnessed Josephine's transformation from frightened stranger to beloved member of the community. Sheriff Davis gave the bride away, an honor that brought tears to his weather-beaten face. As Josephine spoke her vows, standing before the man who had taught her to trust again, she felt as though her life had come full circle. The nightmare of her past would never completely fade, but it had been transformed into something she could carry without being crushed by its weight. That night, as husband and wife retired to their bedroom, a room Lucky had redecorated according to Josephine's preferences, with soft colors and comfortable furnishings, Josephine faced the final frontier of her healing. Physical intimacy had been a source of fear and revulsion for so long that the prospect of sharing a marriage bed, even with a man she loved and trusted, filled her with trepidation. Lucky, sensing her anxiety, sat beside her on the edge of the bed and took her hands in his. "Nothing happens tonight that you don't want," he said firmly. "Not tonight, not ever. We have a lifetime, Josephine. There's no hurry." His patience and understanding broke something loose inside her, not fear this time, but a flood of love so intense it took her breath away. Slowly, Josephine reached up to touch his face, tracing the features that had become as familiar to her as her own. "I do want," she whispered. "I want to be your wife in every way. I'm just afraid." "We'll go slowly," Lucky promised. "And we'll stop any time you need to. You're in control here, Josephine. Always." With infinite tenderness, Lucky kept his word. Their first night together became not an ordeal to be endured but a healing, as gentle touches and whispered words of love began to reclaim what had been stolen from Josephine. Where there had been pain, Lucky brought pleasure. Where there had been humiliation, he brought reverence. By the time dawn broke over the eastern mountains, Josephine had discovered that her body could indeed be a source of joy rather than shame, and that in Lucky's arms, she was not damaged goods but truly, completely treasured. In the years that followed, Blue Water Ranch prospered under their joint care. Lucky's cattle business expanded, and Josephine established a small school on the property, initially teaching just the children of the ranch hands, but eventually welcoming students from neighboring homesteads as well. The documents Lucky had gathered remained in a locked drawer, never used for official charges, but kept as proof of a truth that no one could deny. Occasionally, news would reach them of James Blackwood last seen in Chicago, then St. Louis, always moving eastward, as if some internal compass drove him away from the woman he had failed to break. In their third year of marriage, Josephine gave birth to a daughter, Hannah Catherine Reed, named for Lucky's sister and the woman who had offered Josephine shelter when she needed it most. 2 years later, a son joined their family, Thomas James Reed. Both children grew up knowing their mother's strength and their father's kindness, though the full story of Josephine's past would wait until they were old enough to understand its complexities. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Lucky presented Josephine with a gift, the deed to a small house in Silver Creek, purchased with the intention of establishing a shelter for women who needed a safe place to rebuild their lives. "The Josephine Ellis Reed Home for New Beginnings," he said as he handed her the papers. "A place where women can find what you found here: safety, respect, and the chance to determine their own futures." Tears filled Josephine's eyes as she read the deed. "You still see more in me than I see in myself," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Lucky smiled, the lines at the corners of his eyes deepening with the expression that had only grown more beloved to her over the years. "I see you exactly as you are," he corrected gently. "A treasure beyond price, and the best decision I ever made." As they stood together on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard below, and the sun set over the mountains that had witnessed their journey, Josephine reflected on the path that had brought her here. From the depths of despair to the heights of joy, from being called damaged goods to knowing herself treasured, it had been a journey of 1,000 small steps, each one leading her home. And as Lucky's arms slipped around her waist, pulling her close against the evening chill, Josephine knew with absolute certainty that this man, these children, this life they had built together was worth every painful step along the way. "I love you," she said simply, turning her face up to his. "And I love you," Lucky replied, his kiss a promise renewed with each passing day. Today, tomorrow, and for all the days to come. In the gathering twilight, with the first stars appearing overhead and the sounds of their children's laughter rising from the yard, Josephine and Lucky Reed held each other close, treasuring the moment and all that it represented: not just survival, but triumph, not just healing, but joy, not just a love story, but a life, fully and richly lived, with all its complexities embraced and all its possibilities cherished. And in that embrace, in that moment of perfect understanding, Josephine finally and completely let go of the labels that had once defined her. She was not damaged goods. She was not a victim. She was not even merely a survivor. She was Josephine Reed, wife, mother, teacher, friend. And she was, without question or qualification, exactly where she was meant to be.